Hello, very nice to be here. We wanted to have a conversation about these changes that are going on. There's lots of questions that many of you keep asking. So this opportunity to play in Facebook, welcome, nice to have you here. And we're really interested in your input at the end of this. What I'd like is your questions, if you'd like to ask questions. So you can send some questions in via the chat room, and we'll kind of take them as you go along. I'm not going to answer them as you send them in, but let me kind of go through all of this, and then I'll stop and take your questions, as kind of many as makes sense to do that. So one of the things that I keep getting a lot of questions about is what's happening to me, or what's happening to us, what's happening to society, what's going on. Now, for the many of you who followed Mastering Alchemy over the last years, one of the messages that was very clear right from the beginning, prior to 2012, was there's a shift that's coming, a transition that's coming, a change that's coming. And in 2012, as many of you know, that shift came, and it began to go into effect in a more aggressive manner in about 2014. And now it's moving quite significantly towards this transformation. And everything that's going on with this is about shifting from the third dimension, the state of really being unconscious of being unconscious. Because that's really what the average person is walking around on the planet when it comes to a spiritual perspective. So as this transition is unfolding, it's pushing on you. Now it's pushing on you fairly aggressively. And it's really quite a remarkably wonderful thing if you can stand back and not be the effect of all of the changes, and start to see what's unfolding into the future, what the new human being is actually going to begin to look like going into the future. But in the process of that, you can't take your baggage with you on this journey. And so what many people are feeling is the baggage, the I'm not okay, I don't deserve, I'm never going to succeed, plus a lot of the beliefs and the habits, and you hear me talk about this all the time, those of you who follow what we do in Mastering Alchemy. But right now, that level of baggage that we hold, the emotions, the thoughts that we don't want to tell anybody, the things we think about ourselves, they're just belief systems that simply are misaligned with the heart. And so this transition that's unfolding is unfolding in some really fascinating ways. There are many cycles within cycles, and just a handful of those cycles is there's an evolutionary accelerating cycle, there's a time cycle, there's a dimensional shift in cycles, there's an acceleration in your emotional releasing systems, there's an earth shift, and that's kind of what we're calling climate change. We'll talk about that in a minute. And there is a very significant shift in the cycle of the sun. And to a great extent, it's the sun that's really driving quite a bit of this. But who pays attention to the sun? You know, if it wasn't there, I wouldn't be here either, nor would you. But basically, other than that, we don't really pay much attention to the sun. So let me see if I can begin to set this up to make some sense out of what is happening in terms of how you're being affected. And it is very much these cycles that are pushing on you. These cycles, in the simplest terms, will not allow you to maintain your status quo. Just that plain and simple. You can't stay in where you've been. It's not possible. And if you try to stay for it, you try to fight for those limitations, those restrictions, you're going to be an unhappy camper in the process. So the purpose of this conversation, and if this is an interesting conversation to you, I'll say this again later, there's expansions on this, and so if you're interested, we'll maybe do this a few more times, because this information I'm just going to touch on has a lot of depth to it, and it begins to give you some opportunities to perceive your reality in ways that you may not perceive it at this particular time. Now, let me say something that is really simple, and I'll see if I can make sense of it in a little while. But if, just like I pointed to the sun a moment ago, you spend no time thinking about the sun. If it wasn't for the fact that you breathe air in and out every instant of your experience, for the most part, you wouldn't have any relationship to the air. It just is there. You pay no attention to it. One of the things that's happening in these cycles, it's opening up your perspective and your perception of aspects of shift that are now beginning to be available to you, but they're as subtle as the air. And if there's no reason to put your attention on the air, you don't put your attention on the air. You just continue to move along in your experience. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But let me start with something, again, for those who played in Mastering Alchemy for years, you know, you've heard me say thoughts are electrical and emotions are magnetic. And now, though, that statement, although it's never made a lot of in-depth sense to anybody, is now going to start to begin to be a place where you may want to pay attention, because it's about everything. So there's a relationship between you and the earth, very clearly, but there's a relationship between you and the earth and the sun. So let me kind of define a little bit how that's playing out in your awareness. The sun is also in a major transition. Now, for the sun, this isn't actually new. The sun goes through these cycles in its own right often. And there's one particular cycle right now that's starting to unfold, and that cycle happens about every 350 to 650 years, but pretty much about every 400 years. But we as humans have a very short-term focus, so we don't really look too far out past our nose, and we do spend a lot of time looking at our past in the rearview mirror. But the sun is in this process of going through some significant changes. One of the things that's happening, and it happens every 11 years, and it's not magical, but basically there is a polar shift on the sun. So in the middle of these 11-year cycles, you know them as sunspot cycles. Many people refer to them as sunspot cycles. The sunspots begin to flip. They simply are very active as they move through the cycle at the equator, if you would, and then the north magnetic pole and the south magnetic pole flip. And as it moves into the less active phase of the sun cycles, the sunspots all move to the polar regions, and that's where the sunspots and the activities happen. In the active part of that solar cycle, 11-year cycle, when the sunspots begin to be more at the equator, there's a lot more activity, and much of that activity begins to create these huge flares. And these flares have a direct impact on the Earth. They have a very specific direct impact on the electrical field and the magnetic field of the Earth. And as these sunspots happen, they happen in cycles also, not only the 11-year cycle, but this 350 to 400-year cycle. And we've just gone through a period of time from about 1720 to now, or to really about the year 2000, where we've had a pretty extraordinary climate situation. And in that period of time, at the beginning of that 1720 period of time, is when pretty much the area we call Europe, and the latitude all the way around the Earth at that European level, Europe was in an ice age. Europe was literally in a mini ice age. And at that period in 1720, that ice began to really melt, and everything was really quite wonderful. And so we've had quite a very pleasant climate period. It's an unusual climate period, in fact, when you start to look at these charts. And that climate period is beginning to shift. It began to shift in the year 2000. But one of the things that happens is those sunspots are magnetic, and they produce these huge electrical arcings, these flares, or these arcing sun activity. As those arcs come together sometime, they create this huge flare. Those flares wind up huge electrical particles beginning to be moved towards the Earth. Over the last number of years, that arcing process is beginning to decline on the sun. There is another aspect of the sun that's called, that has these coronal holes. And in those big coronal holes, tremendous charged particles come out into the universe and out into the solar system. But of recent, those electrical circuits have been coming into the Earth. You've seen those pictures of the magnetosphere around the Earth, protecting the Earth. Well, something that's happening on the Earth is the North and South Pole are moving. Now, this isn't going into the flipping of the poles on the Earth. They're just moving. But as they move, the magnetic field of the Earth is being reduced. And it's being reduced actually fairly significantly. From about 2010 to 2000 to 2010, there was about a 10% decrease in the magnetic field. From 2010 to 2017, there's almost another 10% decrease. It's estimated by 2035 there'll be a 50% decrease in the magnetic field of the Earth. Now, why that's kind of important is answering the question, what's going on with you? So without the magnetic field blocking all those huge electrical particles that are being transmitted from the sun, those electrical particles are beginning to fill the atmosphere at a greater and greater rate. Remember, thoughts are electrical, emotions are magnetic. And so as the space that we call atmosphere, air, from the Earth's surface to the ionosphere, at the edge of the atmosphere, is beginning to be more electrically charged. Now, one of the ways that's playing out right now, that's also causing some challenges in your mental process, is those sunspots. Remember I said those are magnetic. They're like a battery in a car. There's two poles. And you get that arcing, electrical arcing. The equivalent of sunspots on the Earth are called high pressure and low pressure zones. They just, different names do it slightly differently. High pressure zones force out the electricity. They begin to create a dryness. They push out the electrical pulses. The low pressure winds up spinning in a format that you've been seeing lately in an aggressive manner, counterclockwise, and it begins to absorb all of the water vapor in the area and very electrically charged. Right now you're looking at a results of some of that electrical charge plus a significant climate shifting on the Earth, and they've called Harvey and Irma and Jose now, and right on the back side of it, Hurricane Marie. All flowing through the Caribbean, all four most likely going to hit the United States. Now, the rest of the world is not having this issue at the moment, but the rest of the world will become the recipient of this because everything moves across these fields. So you're beginning to see more and more electricity generated in the atmosphere. And so one of the things, how that's playing out in your reality, thoughts are electrical. So the many comments I get from people on Facebook, people in Mastering Alchemy, is, why am I so scattered? Why is my nervous system so agitated? Why do I have this excess mental activity? Thoughts are electrical. So this building up of this electrical impulse is something that is going to continue to happen. And how it plays out, it'll slow down, it'll go faster, but it is what is in the process of happening. There's this activity is also affecting your sleep space. And so many are saying, why am I not sleeping well? Why am I waking up? Why am I having lots of odd dreams? We'll talk about that in a second. But basically the nervous system is being pushed on in terms of these electrical impulses. The world activity is also affecting that mental space. And so as you're watching, the hurricanes, and you're watching the potential for nuclear war, you're watching all these political clashes, you're really watching the status quo being very much disrupted in the political system. Status quo being disrupted. I'm off balance. I'm not sure what to do. And I don't like a lot of the things. And many of you can't let go of some of these things that are going on. Neither good or bad. Many of you are environmentalists. Many of you are political activists. Many of you are fill in the blank. And the world's going against you in some of your belief systems. This excessive electrical activity, particularly in the mental process, is really winding you up. And again, not good, not bad, not right, not wrong. I'm talking about process and what's happening to you. Why is this happening to people? So the other part of this is emotions are magnetic. And so as this electrical field begins to build up, and you have lots of thought activity, the magnetic nature of emotions are pulled to the electrical thoughts. And so stepping back in a simple way, when people talk about emotional releases, or this really makes me angry, if you really step back and you think about yourself and you watch other people in a 3D setting, up until this point, people don't pay attention to their thoughts generally. And so an event happens, and because you have a belief, you say, oh, this really makes me angry. Well, the thought by itself is just a thought. This makes me angry. This upsets me. This is frustrating. I don't like what's going on. But when the emotion isn't managed, that slamming impulse of this really makes me angry, and the emotional impulse, the magnetic impulse, binds right to the thought. Many times you watch people walking around, they don't manage their thoughts. They don't manage themselves, but they don't manage their thoughts. They throw energy. They have reactions. They have opinions. They have judgments. They have thoughts that everybody should listen to. Not good or bad, just what happens. That is being amplified. Now, part of that is from a positive standpoint. You can't take your baggage with you. So as this shift is pushing on your issues, pushing you, assisting you, although it doesn't feel like that in general terms, pushing you to let go of the I'm not okay, we don't know how to manage that, and so it begins to be an agitation. And so this whole process of thoughts being electrical and emotions being magnetic are playing out. They're playing out in the sleep space too, because the sleep space is an important part of your spiritual evolution. It's where all your dreams happen, but what are dreams? To a great extent, they are the thoughts that have been thought during the day, but not necessarily acted upon, and they're just moving around in that zone we call the astral zone. So if you are a person that is, let's say, upset about the political process, and you go to sleep upset about the political process, pretty much guaranteed you're going to interact with the political process in your sleep space. It begins to upset your melatonin distribution, your serotonin productions, all of the aspects of balanced sleep. So again, the status quo is being disrupted. Then this dimensional shift is something that is really very interesting, because it's pushing on you in ways that, again, you can't take your baggage with you. So on both a positive aspect and just a practical aspect, this dimensional shift is opening up. And here's where I use that example about air again. You are being presented with some really remarkable opportunities. But if you don't have a definition of the opportunities, if you don't have a sense of calling it air and then understanding what it does, it just begins to be something that you pass through. And so many of the changes in the dimensional level are beginning to present very interesting opportunities. Let me give you one example. In how this example is understood, see, if you walk around in 3D, angry, irritated, frustrated, that's where your attention point is, and the ability to see the subtleness of the air, again my example, begins to be very, very difficult. So if you begin to define 5D, for those of you who don't play in Mastering Alchemy, as a state of being, and not so much form as in the house, the trees, the new beautiful beach that you want to reside for the rest of eternity on. We're really not talking about that. We're talking about this aspect of consciousness, state of being. And it's in the state of well-being, where you have appreciation and gratitude and happy and co-creation and cooperation and just that sense of well-being. It's in that sense of well-being, you all know this at one point or another in life, where you were in ease, it was relaxed, it was enjoyable, it was kind of fun, it was nice, I'm not stressed. It's in that not stressed space that you begin to realize there's air, or the dimensional shifts that are being presented. One of those dimensional shifts that is happening to you is really pretty important. Let me see if I can make another analogy. If you know the space where you're, let's say, walking down your street, or in a city where a lot of activity is going, and in the mall, wherever there's a lot of activity, and all of a sudden you look over there and there's your friend. Now, there was really no reason to look over there. You were walking through lots of people, and your attention point went to an energy pattern that was recognizable to you. And you just simply moved over there and recognized them, and everything you were doing at that moment stops, and your attention point goes over here. Hi, nice to see you. That mental perception I'm going to reference is like the air. If you can find yourself beginning to operate in well-being, calm, balanced, perspective of well-being, the ability to take advantage of this mental perception, the ability to look into this dimensional shift and begin to understand how to move in a fifth dimensional way without the baggage, without arguing for. You're going to start to see what the positive side of the dimension shift, which is huge, is beginning to present to everybody. In that process of the mental body is changing, the emotional body is changing, one of the things that is happening is your evolutionary sense of yourself is changing. You are changing. On a DNA level, you're changing. The brain is changing. One of the aspects that is both challenging and really exciting, depending on whether you can perceive it from the glass half full or half empty, is this mental perception. As the brain starts to change, and this is what is also generating some of the mental anxiety, is something in the brain that is called the Eye of Horus. Now, most people who even know that reference think of it as part of the Egyptian mystery schools or wear it as a necklace around their neck. But it is an interrelationship between the pineal center, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the sixth chakra, the seventh chakra. It's a dynamic aspect of the brain. As that part of the brain is beginning to come together, and it is coming together for everybody, for some it's causing confusion, status quo is going away, but for those that are in that fifth dimensional space, it's beginning to open up your spiritual perspective, your spiritual abilities. You might call them psychic abilities. Your clairvoyance, your clairaudience, your clairsentience, your telepathy, your transmediumship. There's about 22 of those abilities that are beginning to function as a unit. Now, I'm not talking about picking the lottery. I'm talking about perception of realities. And it's in this shift that a lot of people, I think, are beginning to have confusion, and it's going to get more confusing. For those of you who are playing in a space of balance, awareness, defining your space, happy, enthusiastic, it's going to be less disruptive. But it's not a concept. It's about simply becoming this perspective and observing the perspective from that place of the perspective. So that's one of the things that is disrupting an awful lot of people, is your perception is beginning to be altered. Now, let me add one more piece to this in your evolutionary aspect. Now, all of these things we can talk about for a half hour to an hour each, and so let me again say, if you're interested, I'll start breaking some of these things out and presenting them in a little different manner, or doing it, every few weeks here. If you like this, push like, share it. That's the best way to figure out whether we're going to do it more. But this last piece, let me just talk about in your evolutionary process, is really pretty exciting. It will sound a little bit challenging, but it is who the new human is. And the new human is going to take some time to evolve, but time doesn't matter here, because time is also one of these things that is changing quite a bit. But if you're paying attention to the world around you, one of the things you hear about is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is at a point that it's within a year or two of making an exponential shift. I mean, really, really different than anything you've imagined if you're not paying attention to artificial intelligence. Way beyond pushing your, electric garage door opener and it beginning to happen from 60 miles away. This aspect of artificial intelligence, if you've been watching it, and let me just reference the IBM Blue machine, Big Blue. Big Blue is now able to, on its own, diagnose cancer patients to an extraordinary level of agreed upon diagnosis. They've played with some of the leading cancer specialists in the world, and they've compared all of their diagnosis for a client, and many of them, they all had an assessment of each one of these. And independently, Big Blue, the artificial intelligent IBM machine, basically agreed virtually 100%, and in some cases had a better diagnosis than the diagnosis that was presented. Now, that's pretty extraordinary that a machine can do that. Keeping it really simple, one of the things that's happening to you as a spiritual being in your evolution is that artificial intelligence, which is beginning to come into a state of its own ability to think for itself, is going to be the brain that you in the new human begins to have. Now, I don't mean you're going to plug in a machine. I mean how that artificial intelligence as a consciousness functions is going to be what your brain is going to be in the new human. Not a machine, you having the capacity to understand, think, process into these multidimensional realms with that functioning component of living consciousness. You and that, take away the word machine, but you and the construct of how that works is what is going to be the brain. The other part of it is, and this is where people who get upset about artificial intelligence, they'll say, well, the argument is, well, why does artificial intelligence need the human being at all? They can just basically end human life. That's true. They could do that. And in fact, in the fall of consciousness, that has happened in other planets, in other universes. Keep that simple. But right here, that's not what the intention is, and that's not what the direction is as you begin to play in the heart, in the sacred heart, as you begin to reconfigure the chakra system, as many of you know, that consciousness in the fifth dimensional space, multi-dimensional space, is the thinking that directs that brain. Now, evolution is happening very rapidly right here, and it will take a series of iterations over some period of time. But the ability for each of us to begin to step into the process of moving in that direction without having the significant challenges of what I've been talking about for the last half hour is actually very much available to you. And so this transition to this new human is something that is a choice. And it's very much a choice about managing your electrical thoughts and your emotions that are magnetic and beginning to step into. Now, it's not that sounds good, yeah, I'd like to experience that. It really is about doing it, and it's about living it. And so those of you playing in Mastering Alchemy, you've had a huge jump on the game. But please understand, this is now accelerating, and it's going to accelerate more and more. And you're going to see more disruption in terms of climate, in terms of earth changes, in terms of geopolitical activities in the external world. For the most part, those things have nothing to do with you. So really understanding how to manage your energy field, manage your space, begin to recognize present time, begin to choose rather than shoot, ready, aim. Simple tools all taught in level 1, but basically in level 2, but basically the perspective of seeing everything around you without getting everything around you, all of you. So if you'd like, I'll talk more about these topics more specifically going forward, but let me come to a stopping point right there and see if you have some questions that maybe relate to kind of what was just said. So what I'm going to do is give this microphone to Tina, who is going to ask some of the questions that have already come in. And then let's see if we can spend maybe another 15 minutes or so and see where it goes.
Thanks, Jim. So I have a question from Andrew. What's happening to the animals with all of these electrical changes?
Okay, to a great extent, you're not going to like this answer. They don't get caught up in politics. They don't get caught up in all of this transition the same way I'm talking. And this is a shift. And basically, as I heard Esther Hicks say one time, the animals, they're not going extinct, they're going home. But they're now going to be going home at a much more rapid level. As this electricity changes, as the sun changes, one of the things that I pointed to, but we can talk about much more thoroughly in the next time, is those of you who are absolutely believing there is climate warming going on, let me offer you a alternative possibility. You're really beginning to see climate cooling. And if climate cooling follows the 350 to 650 year patterning, we are right at the 400-year point. And when you look at the sunspots and the sun patterning, it started in the year 2000. There is lower high temperatures and lower low temperatures, in spite of what the logic says how hot it's getting. But the animals are going to make their transition before most humans make their transition.
All right, so we have a question from Allison, who is a level 2 student. When interacting with people socially, I use the foundational tools, the rose, grounding cord, etc. Yet my nervous system gets funky. I tremble, feel like jello, and my brain feels like electricity is going through it. Is this my physical body adjusting to 5D, or a psychic ability trying to stabilize? Even intuitive feelings and insights can make me vibrate in an unpleasant manner.
So the simple answer is yes. But so you're in that level 2 program, you're in process. One of the things that's happening in that level 2 body of work, you now got a set of skills, you've got a set of tools, you can define your space. Now what you're beginning to do is manage your space, and you're beginning to now become aware of releasing a lot of the energetic patterns that are in the emotional body. So if you have an emotion that says, I'm not okay, and then you look around the world and the world appears to you to be not okay, your rose, your tools work, but there's a tendency to go to an old pattern. And in level 2, you're in the process of getting some really pretty amazing tools that allows you to dismantle those old patterns without a lot of difficulty. So yes, you're feeling it, and it is part of the shifting, and you're in process moving away from that right now.
Okay, this is from Maritza. She says, lately I've been feeling a lot of energy in my feet, almost like floating. And we've actually had another question or two about people feeling things in their feet.
Yeah, this is really very consistent with what I'm talking about electricity. So if you think about lightning, and lightning basically, when you start to create lots of water vapor into those low pressure zones, so we call them thunderstorms, those thunderstorms begin to interact in such a way you get lightning. And that's a huge electrical release in the same fashion of that arcing I was talking about on the sun. But lightning grounds. And so one of the things that this, as the atmosphere is beginning to become more electrical, the nature of the surface of the earth is also where it's all beginning to ground. So that's one of the factors that play into why numbers of people are talking about their feet feeling electrical or their body feeling electrical. Using those grounding tools actually begins to help. And the other tool that really begins to help those of you are aware of, opening up the feet chakras and beginning to run more earth energy into the legs, basically begins to neutralize a lot of that electricity. But we can talk about that more also in a future session.
So this is from Patricia. What is the role of 4D as we transition from 3D to 5D? 4D feels significant, yet hardly is mentioned, and I'm wondering why that is.
Well, 4D is very much what most people call the astral plane, but fourth dimension is not a physical dimension, it's a thought realm. And In simple terms, it's where all the thoughts ever thought that have never been acted upon go. I mean, you ever ask yourself, where does the thought you just thought go when you get done thinking the thought that you just thought? Probably not. But thoughts go someplace, and they go into this fourth dimensional thought realm all around you. It's also the realm that you'd call the emotional body of the earth. And in that context, it's being purged at an aggressive level. And so a lot of those thoughts that people feel in their sleep, or thoughts that people are beginning now to be susceptible to, and as this electricity in the brain, this nervousness starts to happen, you're starting to find interaction with that fourth dimensional space because it's opening up to you. And it too will begin to be challenging depending on the baggage that you walk around with. So if you can begin to move into that fifth dimensional space of well-being, that level of I'm not okay basically doesn't interact with you at all. And that's very much what the level 2 and kind of year 1, level 3 is very much all about for those who are playing there and those of you who are interested in that work.
So this is from Colleen. She's asking about aches and pains, and we've actually had quite a few people wondering about the things that they're experiencing due to the 3D body being in 5D. What do I have to do to have more ease in my body?
So let me give you a couple of answers. The first answer is you as a spiritual being are moving faster than your physical body is moving. So you are evolving in the process now faster than the body is. The second part of that is, to a great extent, many of you are older. And you've got all of the aches and pains and the damages and the falling down and all of the belief systems that say I'm not okay, consequently you're not okay. All of that running through the body. And as this acceleration happens, as more of this emotion is being drawn from the body, you're feeling those aches and pains. Many of you heard me say this before, but kind of how this works is you're in your spiritual space and well-being, and then you're in a mental space, emotional space, and physical space. But the more you think I'm not okay and I don't do it right and I'm not okay, that begins to set up the entire vibrational field of the physical body. And many of us have been hiding the I'm not okay, or I don't want them to know about me. And that's all absorbed into the physical body. And that's where a lot of these aches and pains are occurring. There's an aspect of something we're going to do in morning conversations. For those of you who watch morning conversations, we're going to bring in a man named Dr. Everett Beyer, who's very highly oriented towards nutrition and the brain and the new human. And we're going to begin to have in morning conversations a series, 6, 7, 8 series of conversations with Everett, talking specifically about high quality supplements, or things that you can begin to do that actually start to make the body healthier. Very targeted, specific things for both the brain and for inflammation and processes where you can heal yourself. So if you're so inclined watching morning conversation, I think you'll find it very, very helpful what he has to say.
Okay, and from Maria, her question is, Jim, are you surprised at how fast these earth changes are happening?
Yes and no. They're going to continue to happen. We've said they were going to happen, and it's one thing, to hear they're going to happen. It's another thing to be faced with, Hurricane Irma or Harvey in that context. So I think the message here is assume they are going to happen. Be happy if they don't happen. But the real question is, how do you choose? how do you choose to prepare for you? Whatever prepare means. If you live in Los Angeles or San Francisco, you have a very pronounced earthquake fault. So if it happened, what would you do? And, so it's really about, this is going to continue. It's going to get warmer for a short period of time. But what if in 10 years, all of a sudden you're really faced with a sun that is kind of going to sleep, and it's not as hot as it was previously. It's happened very clearly for over the last 11,000 years. It's not an anomaly, but it's right on time. Now, does it happen now? Does it happen in 15 years, 20 years, 30 years? I don't know. But indications are this is something that's happening. So how do you prepare? How do you choose? So we'll talk more about that in the next sessions.
Thanks, Jim. This is our last question, and it's from James. And James asks, how do we transition through this without being the effect of it all?
So my simplest answer is mastering alchemy. That's my whole focus for the last 30 years, basically. How do you basically reposition yourself so that you can manage your energy field, observe what's happening without becoming the effect of it? One of the things that is happening with this shift, it's happening in layers. And I'll go back to my comments about that mental perception. First, if you can begin to really move to well-being and get out of I'm not okay, learn the tools to get you out of that. But as you get out of the I'm not okay, and for many of you who have those tools, really begin to be them, because in this mental perception you're beginning to have, in this opening of the eye of Horus, where you're able to start to see and know and feel on a very different level than you used to. I mean, many of you have used those skills, but those skills are now going to gel, they're going to congeal, they're going to begin to be functioning as a unit of perception. It's something where you can basically well ahead of time see the train coming down the track and realizing I'm standing on the track. Without panicking, just be able to step off the track. More appropriately, you're going to see the opportunity to do things in ease versus how you have been doing them. So this has a whole lot to do with time, and time being a circular function and moving into present time. But it's going to happen in layers. And as you step on the staircase of the layers, you literally are not going back to where you were before. And to a great extent, as I'm watching, many of the people that are playing in Mastering Alchemy who are now in that light body, they're beginning to make these transitions through these layers without paying a whole lot of attention to almost everything that I've been talking to. So how do you choose? How do you manage yourself? How do you position yourself? How do you stay in present time and observe what's going on, and then simply step off the track or begin to climb the stairway? That becomes a choice of each of us, and that's really where this is all going. So some of you that are new, that don't know a lot about Mastering Alchemy, there's a lot of free tools that are on the website, but it's really, our focus is becoming more driven to support the people in level 1 and level 2, because this is coming very rapidly, and in the context of this rapid shift, having these tools is going to be really very valuable. So let me kind of come to a stopping place right there. If this was interesting and you would like me to do this more, there are numbers of topics that are all related to kind of how do you step onto that stairway, how do you begin to be less of the effect of the noise, how do you get out of a lot of the pieces that are going on. One more thing that I didn't mention that a lot of you are the effect of is everybody else around you is in stress, upset, worried, don't like what they're seeing. That energy to a person that doesn't manage their energy space The energy of the world in this chaotic state right now passes right through your field. So, and those of you who have tools and know how to manage your space, one of the questions that I would strongly suggest you ask first before you say, what's wrong with me, is just ask, is this my stress, my anxiety, or is the consciousness of the earth, the collectiveness of the earth community in their fear pushing against my space? To a great extent, your perception is not going to be about you, but it's going to be about the world around you. And once, again, this is like the air, once you recognize it's not me, it gives you a completely different playing field to move around, rather than assuming what the world is doing is what's affecting you internally. So with that, let me come to a stopping point. Thank you for playing. I hope this was useful. If you'd like to do it again, push your like button, share it with your friends, and then we'll make a decision whether we can kind of do a little bit more of this. So go off and have yourself a lovely evening, day, wherever you are. Blessings.